want retribution. Oh yeah, we want retribution. Oh yeah, we want retribution. Oh yeah, we want retribution. Yeah, we ran out of patience. Boil up with the cold hard hatred. I can feel the vibration in the streets. It's a new sense.
A lone Moroi guard stood at his post, his pale face hidden beneath the shadow of his hood. His long fingers gripped his weapon tightly as the alarm bell rang throughout the prison. In the distance, a muffled explosion rattled the walls, shaking the ground beneath him. Dust drifted down from the ceiling, a warning of the chaos that was unfolding somewhere else. Echoes of distant footsteps reverberated through the passages. Another explosion, and then another. The ground trembled once more, and the guard's eyes narrowed beneath his hood. A second guard from House Moroi appeared in the corridor, flanked by 6 grotesque familiars, misshapen and warped. Their yellowed eyes gleamed with hunger as they slunk behind their master.
What was that?
Brother, we have intruders inside the prison. They're moving fast.
How is that possible? The warden can't find them?
They destroyed the warden's eye and its guardian.
The first guard was stunned. The warden's eye was the prison's most powerful surveillance. For it to be destroyed meant they were dealing with something far beyond the ordinary.
And the specters?
They're using illusions to misdirect the specters. All the corridors are blocked, and the guards are ready. But they took the Widow's Walk.
The first guard stiffened. The Widow's Walk was a death trap, a part of the prison so dangerous even Nosferatu feared to tread its passages. Only the most insane or desperate would dare.
That path leads right past here.
The warden sent me to reinforce this position. If they are coming for the prisoners in this cell, we are to defend it with our lives.
They'll never pass through the Widow's Walk.
A distant clash echoed through the halls, followed by a monstrous roar that rattled the walls. Both guards exchanged a glance, their fingers tightening on their weapons. Then, with a sudden and violent force, an explosion ripped through the wall beside them, sending dust and debris flying. The air filled with smoke and stone fragments. Out of the haze came the sound of a maddened laughter, a laugh that chilled the blood. Figures emerged from the smoke. Oppenheimer, Akasha, and Jolene, battered but defiant. Their eyes glowed with hunger. Before the guards could react, Jolene raised her hand, and the trio vanished into thin air, their forms dissolving into a cascade of shifting illusions.
They're here!
Panic gripped the Moroi sentinels as they fired blindly into the haze, their shots ricocheting off stone walls and disappearing into the swirling darkness. Without warning, one of the guards was lifted off the ground, his feet kicking wildly as though an invisible hand had gripped him by the throat. His eyes bulged with terror and his screams turned into a sickening gurgle. His head twisted violently with a bone-cracking snap and his body went limp, dropping lifelessly to the floor. The illusion shattered, revealing Oppenheimer standing amidst the chaos, his eyes alight with madness and hunger. He grinned, blood trickling down his fingers as the crumpled body hit the floor.
Too slow,
he sneered, launching himself at the remaining guards with explosive speed. The other guards barely had time to react before Oppenheimer was on them. His fists crashed into his enemies with brutal strength, breaking bones and shattering ribs. Akasha, meanwhile, moved with deadly grace. She danced between the familiars, her acrobatic agility allowing her to dodge their attacks with fluid precision. Her blades sliced through the air as she cut down the twisted creatures. One by one, they fell, blood splattering the stone floors. She spun and leaped, each movement a deadly flourish. Jolene, taking advantage of the chaos, slipped past the fighting. She crouched before the cell door, her fingers deftly working the lock. A guard lunged at Oppenheimer, desperate to land a blow, but Oppenheimer caught him by the throat and slammed him into the wall with such force that the stone cracked. The guard crumpled to the floor, groaning in pain. Akasha flicked her blade clean of blood as the last of the familiars collapsed at her feet. She turned toward a wounded familiar, struggling to crawl away, leaving a trail of blood behind. It whimpered, eyes wide with terror.
Mercy, please.
The creature begged, trying to pull itself out of reach. Oppenheimer chuckled darkly, stepping over to the familiar.
Mercy? Wrong number. There is no one with that name here.
He placed a heavy boot on the familiar's back, pressing it down until the creature squealed in agony. With a swift, brutal motion, he ended the creature's life, the familiar's body going still as its blood soaked into the stones. At that moment, the lock clicked, and Jolene stood up, swinging the cell door open. Inside, 4 figures lay slumped against the stone walls. Wade, Javier, Stephanie, and Leon.
We have to move quickly. The alarms will bring reinforcements soon.
Jolene reached into her bag, pulling out 4 blood bags.
We need to wake them first. This is powerful stuff. Blood from a vampire strong enough to give them a little boost. Feel free.
Oppenheimer pulled the stakes from the 4 Nosferatu one by one, their bodies jerking as the wooden shaft slid free. Jolene knelt beside them, offering the blood bags, pressing the first to Wade's lips. His eyes flickered with hunger, and he drank deeply, his strength returning in slow pulses. Javier, Stephanie, and Leon followed, their faces grim but grateful as the powerful blood infused them with a new vitality. They drank in silence, the intensity of their hunger apparent in every swallow. When the bags were empty, they stood, the power of the blood coursing through them, a dark energy that rekindled their dead bodies. The 4 Nosferatu were freed but visibly shaken. They exchanged glances, the weight of their recent torment still heavy in their eyes. Jolene stepped forward, her voice soft and soothing.
We're here to get you out. We're taking you back to the Tower's territory. You're safe now.
Leon's eyes flicked toward Oppenheimer and Akasha, still standing by the door, alert and ready for anything. Oppenheimer's eyes narrowed with impatience.
Safe? Not yet. We don't have time to waste. Move.
Javier winced, his hand going to his temple as a sudden headache pulsed through his skull. He staggered, gritting his teeth. The others turned to look at him, and Jolene's expression shifted instantly, recognizing the signs.
Don't use your gifts. You're still low on blood, and trying to push yourselves will only make things worse.
Javier, unwilling to be a burden, glanced toward one of the dead guards near the cell. His eyes landed on a firearm discarded in the chaos. He reached down and grabbed it. Wade followed his example, snatching up another gun, while Leon and Stephanie did the same. With a sharp sound, they cocked their weapons. Akasha, however, had her mind elsewhere. The hunger gnawed at her, worsened by the battle. She recalled the moment Jolene had stopped her from feeding on the Moroi guard earlier, right before they had descended into the underground tunnels.
How did you know you had to stop me from drinking the blood of that guard?
Varys said that the Moroi venom is dangerous to us vampires. There could be poison in their bloods.
Akasha froze, the hunger making her body tremble slightly as she processed Jolene's words. Poison in the blood. It made sense, but it didn't ease the craving inside her. Jolene glanced at Akasha, noticing her struggle. Without missing a beat, she reached into her bag and pulled out the last 2 blood bags she had brought for the mission.
Here,
She said, tossing one to Oppenheimer and the other to Akasha. Oppenheimer caught his bag mid-air, tearing into it with his fangs. The blood flooded his mouth, warm and revitalizing, bringing a surge of strength back into his body. Akasha did the same, drinking deeply, the familiar taste of blood temporarily calming the fire within her. As Akasha finished, Jolene's gaze flicked toward the far wall. A faint shimmer, barely visible, passed through the stone, the ghostly forms of specters drifting through the prison's tunnels searching for them.
we need to move. We go this way.
No, we go that way.
Oppenheimer countered, stepping forward with a grin.
That way take us deeper into the prison. You know that.
Jolene's eyes narrowed. Akasha's mind raced as she caught the subtle tension in Oppenheimer's demeanor. He was hiding something. Her eyes flicked to his, sharp with realization.
What are you not telling us?
Oppenheimer's grin widened, but he didn't answer. He simply turned and began walking in the direction he had pointed. The others, unsure but unwilling to split the group, followed him, the walls seemingly closing in around them as they descended further into the heart of the prison. The corridors of the labyrinth twisted and contorted like the limbs of a spider, stretched on before them. The wraiths drifted through the walls like sentinels, but Jolene's illusions kept the group ahead of their enemies. Oppenheimer led the way, but from time to time he got busy planting small, subtle explosives at key points in the stone walls. The distant sounds of the guards echoed down the corridors as they continued, explosions soon following behind them. rumbling through the labyrinth and shaking dust loose from the ceilings. As they continued, they came to a towering wall blocking their path. The stone stretched upward, slick with moisture, with no easy way to climb. The only way forward was up, and the height seemed insurmountable. Akasha stepped forward, assessing the distance. Without a word, she took off in a sprint. She leapt, pushing off a protruding stone, then twisted her body mid-air, catching another narrow ledge with her fingertips. Her movements were graceful, precise, and filled with elegance as she launched herself higher, bounding from one jutting surface to another with the agility of a dancer. Her boots scraped against the damp stone as she performed a final flip, landing on a narrow ledge high above. From this vantage point, she found an old rusted mechanism hidden in the shadows. She pulled a lever with a grunt of effort, and a creaking noise echoed through the tunnel as an old rickety set of metal stairs slowly descended. The stairs clanged into place with a heavy thud, providing a way for the rest of the group to climb. Up there, they finally found a long corridor. At the end stood a single, ominous door. It was heavy and reinforced, crafted specifically to contain powerful vampires. Akasha glanced at the door, narrowing her eyes.
Who's in there?
Oppenheimer's smile widened as he moved to the door.
Give us a hand, Wade.
Of course, boss.
Their combined strength tore it from its frame with a sharp screech of metal and stone. The door slammed to the ground, revealing the darkness beyond. The only light was the faint, flickering glow from the corridor, illuminating a solitary figure inside. A man, his thin frame barely visible through the shadows, was shackled with heavy chains and manacles. His skin was pale, drained of life, his body exsanguinated but not entirely. He had the hollow look of a prisoner long forgotten. His black hair hung messily around his face, and as he raised his head, his eyes gleamed faintly in the low light, with an intellect that had never dulled despite the endless torture.
What a nice family reunion.
Lost one.
Jolene's face lit up. She immediately rushed forward, kneeling to work the lock on his chains. Her fingers moving with delicate precision set about freeing him. Akasha remained at the entrance, arms crossed, but even she seemed taken aback.
I was not expecting him.
The lost one tilted his head, his eyes shifting to her with mild amusement.
Nor was I expecting you.
Why did they leave you with blood? Why didn't they drain you like the rest of us?
The lost one's gaze shifted to Stephanie, his smile faint but chilling.
Because the warden enjoys his games. Torture was more fun for him.
Soon, Jolene released the last lock. The chains fell away and the lost one sagged, his body too weak to stand. Oppenheimer stepped forward, catching him before he could collapse.
You'll be fine,
Oppenheimer said, his tone almost teasing as he helped him to his feet. Jolene embraced him briefly. Akasha gave him a nod, acknowledging him with the respect of kinship, but her eyes remained wary.
Can we go now? Any more surprises?
No, dear sister. Now that our cousin is with us, we have all we came for. Let's move.
It was time to return to the surface and flee before the warden's forces closed in on them. They turned toward the exit. Akasha led the way, her keen senses guiding them through the maze-like structure. Jolene followed closely. Behind them, Wade, Javier, Stephanie, Leon, and the Lost One moved in silence, still shaken but determined. Oppenheimer kept a watchful eye on the rear, his body coiled like a predator ready to strike. They steadily made their way upward. The prison's layout was a nightmare of spirals and dead ends, but at last, the scent of fresh air grew stronger, a sign they were nearing the exit. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they emerged into a wide, open chamber near the prison's edge. The exit loomed ahead, a massive iron door half open with the faint light of the outside world spilling in. But the sight that greeted them in the chamber was anything but a relief. Corpses littered the floor, twisted in grotesque angles, drained of life and abandoned where they had fallen. The stench of death was overwhelming, a bitter reminder of the prison's horrors. And there, standing, was the warden. He was a tall figure, draped in a long, tattered cloak that swirled around him like mist. His mere presence seemed to leach the warmth from the room, and a chilling aura of death clung to him like a second skin. Flanking him were two of his most powerful creations, specters that had taken possession of ancient, decayed warriors. On one side stood a towering figure encased in battered samurai armor, the faint glow of its undead spirit flickering within the hollow skeleton. The other, equally imposing, was a long-dead Viking warrior. its rusted chainmail and helmet giving it a fearsome, ghostly visage. These were no ordinary wraiths. They were the Warden's strongest ancient souls, ready to serve him in death. The Warden's lips curled into a thin smile as he regarded them.
All you've done is useless. The island is surrounded. All you managed to accomplish is to deliver yourselves into my hands.
Jolene immediately began weaving an illusion, the air around her shimmering, but the Warden lifted his hand and flicked his wrist with an almost dismissive wave. The illusion unraveled instantly, crumbling into nothing. Jolene's eyes narrowed, frustration flashing across her face. The Warden's voice rose in a guttural chant, a fell incantation that sent a shiver through the air. His hand extended toward her, his fingers twisting in a motion that was both deliberate and vicious. In an instant, a rift tore open behind Jolene, reaching also Javier and Stephanie, who were unlucky nearby. The fabric of reality itself seemed to unravel. The edges of the veil between the material world and the Shadowlands, the realm of the dead, tore apart and the three were yanked into the void, their forms flickering before they vanished entirely. Jolene's last expression was one of shock as her body was consumed by the dark magic, disappearing into the abyss with a haunting silence. The others stared in horror at the now empty space where their companions had stood.
Now, let's be done with those little illusions,
he said as the two specters stepped forward, weapons drawn, ready to face the remaining group. Jolene, Javier, and Stephanie found themselves thrust into the eerie, colorless world of the Shadowlands, a dimension just beyond the reach of the living. The air felt like an unending fog that carried the whispers of the dead. All around them, the landscape was a twisted reflection of the prison they had just left, but here it was, overrun with the phantoms of the long dead, specters that could never fully manifest in the physical world.
What the hell just happened?
We're on the other side of the veil now. These specters, they couldn't touch us before, but now they can. And we can hurt them too.
As if on cue, dark shapes emerged from the mist. Their forms moved like shadows through the fog. They floated closer, dozens of them, drawn to their presence, hungry for the meager life force the dead bodies of Jolene, Javier, and Stephanie carried with them. Javier clenched his teeth, gripping the firearm he had taken from one of the dead guards. Jolene reached into her bag and pulled out an intricate glove with metallic veins running through it. She slipped it on, the glove crackling to life with arcs of blue electricity dancing around her fingers. A grin spread across her face as the glove began to hum with power.
Well, this is going to be fun.
With a flick of her wrist, Jolene unleashed a bolt of lightning from her gloved hand, the electricity arcing through the air and striking a group of specters. The wraiths disintegrated upon contact, their forms vanishing into the fog with a sizzle and a wail. Jolene laughed, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of the fight. Javier, still holding his firearm, opened fire on the approaching specters. The bullets passed through them, dispersing their forms, but the sheer number of enemies quickly became overwhelming. For every specter that fell, 3 more took its place. His magazine quickly ran dry. He threw the empty weapon aside. With no other options, he took a deep breath, knowing he couldn't avoid it any longer. He had to fight with everything he had. His mental powers flared to life, and with a violent sweep of his hand, he sent a wave of force crashing into the specters, their ghostly forms scattering like leaves in a storm. His body trembled, but Javier didn't stop. With every push of his telekinesis, he sent more of the specters flying, their ghostly bodies disappearing. But despite their efforts, the specters were relentless, closing in from all sides, their ethereal forms lashing out and cutting into Jolene and Javier with claws made of shadows. Blood streaked down their bodies from the gashes, pain searing through their minds. Stephanie, watching their struggle, finally had enough. Darkness swirled around her like a living thing, and with a motion of her hand, she raised a towering wall of shadow between them and the approaching ghosts. The specters slammed into the wall, but it held. For a moment, they were safe.
Stay behind me!
But the specters began to breach the wall, their ghostly forms seeping through the cracks in the shadow barrier. Stephanie clenched her fist, and the shadows in her hand began to solidify. She shaped them into a sword, long and jagged, and in her other hand, a shield, dark as the void itself. She stepped forward, placing herself between her allies and the specters, and swung her shadow sword in a wide arc, cutting through the advancing ghosts. To her surprise and pleasure, the sword cleaved through the specters effortlessly, their ethereal forms torn apart by the dark blade.
Looks like I found their weakness.
Stephanie muttered with a smirk, her confidence surging as she slashed through the enemies. Each strike of her shadow blade reduced the ghosts to nothing, their forms dissipating into the air as she held the line. The three fought in unison, Jolene unleashing arcs of lightning from her glove, Javier sending out waves of telekinetic force, and Stephanie holding the front with her shadow sword and shield. But despite their combined strength, the number of specters seemed endless, and their energy was waning. Oppenheimer, Akasha, Leon, Wade, and the Lost One squared off against the towering necromancer Warden and his two powerful undead specters. The Warden stood at the far end of the chamber, one of his hands raised containing the dark spell that kept Jolene, Javier, and Stephanie trapped on the other side of the veil. Despite his intense focus, the Warden still had enough mastery over his magic to assault his enemies in the material realm. The dead samurai charged first, its katana gleaming as it slashed toward Wade, who barely dodged the attack. The sound of an impact rang out as Wade retaliated with a powerful blow, tearing the armor. The Viking swung his sword, nearly taking Leon's head off. He ducked just in time, his speed unmatched. In a flash, he gained distance and opened fire on the Viking. The undead brute, however, barely flinched, its decayed corpse too far gone to feel pain. Akasha, moving with swift grace, buried one of her knives through the Viking's forehead, cracking the bone beneath the rotting flesh. The samurai was relentless, his attacks precise and methodical. Oppenheimer lunged at him using his knife to parry a swing of the katana. With a brutal pull, he ripped apart the sword arm of the samurai. Wade saw an opening and followed with a punch that launched the samurai's head away from the body. The Viking answered Akasha's blow with one of his own, her knife still stuck at his head. Leon felt the raven inside him stir, and as he concentrated, he sensed the speed of the movement of his undead enemy wane. Instead of accelerating himself, he made the Viking move terribly slow. The creature helplessly tried to attack Akasha once more, but to everyone it seemed to move in slow motion. She stepped to the side to avoid the attack, and launched a storm of blows, taking knife after knife from where she hid them, and leaving each one stuck at the Viking like a pincushion. Each attack shattered its body more and more until the Viking fell inert. However, to their dismay, each spectre possessed another nearby corpse, rising again in a new form and drawing their weapons again.
No fun! They keep getting back up!
It's the Warden. He's keeping them alive. As long as he holds the spell, they'll keep possessing new bodies.
Oppenheimer roared, before he and Wade sent another reanimated corpse crashing to the ground. The spectre immediately left the fallen corpse and entered another body on the floor. It rose again, this time in the form of an ancient knight in rusted plate armor.
Enough of this!
Oppenheimer snarled. He turned his focus to the Warden. With a burst of speed, he launched himself at the necromancer. The Warden flicked his wrist, and a blast of necrotic energy slammed into Oppenheimer, sending him crashing into the far wall. The impact shook the room, and for a moment everything seemed to stop. Oppenheimer pushed himself up, blood trickling down his face, a chilling laugh escaping his lips. The Warden raised his hand again, but this time Akasha, using her agility, darted in and struck him across the chest with a sharp knife. The Warden staggered but answered with an even more powerful necrotic blast. She was sent away and fell to the ground, barely moving.
You are going back underground and into your cells soon.
Leon, use that last power on the Warden.
Leon once again concentrated and felt the dullness spreading against the Warden. This time his enemy resisted much better, but Leon's efforts were still enough to slow down the necromancer. Wade flashed around the room, and with the Warden's slowed reflexes, he managed to dodge the necrotic blast. Wade used this opportunity to grapple the necromancer instead of punching him.
Boss, he is ready!
Oppenheimer took his chance. With a powerful leap, he closed the distance between them and drove his fist into the Warden's chest. The necromancer gasped as the force of the blow crushed his ribcage. Oppenheimer laughed, and with one final vicious strike, he tore the Warden's heart from his chest, holding it in his hand as the necromancer's eyes widened in shock.
And here is your Christmas present,
he said as he stuck a knife at the hole in the Warden's chest. Before letting go of the knife, Oppenheimer charged it with a powerful energy. Both Wade and Oppenheimer barely had the time to get away before the Warden exploded from inside out, the dark magic leaving his ashes in an ethereal wail. The spell binding Jolene, Javier, and Stephanie to the other side of the veil was broken. With a sudden shimmer, they reappeared in the material realm, their forms solidifying as they returned. Jolene blinked, disoriented. Javier, bloodied and bruised, gave a shaky nod of recognition, while Stephanie, her shadow sword still in hand, surveyed the scene. The group fled the prison. Behind them, the echoes of pursuers followed them closely. Undead specters and guards determined not to let their prey escape. They reached the coastline where a thick, unnatural fog hung over. A towering, ghostly ship awaited them. The Flying Dutchman. Its black sails rippled like shadowy wings, and its weathered wood creaked ominously as it bobbed on the waves. Abaddon stood at the helm, ready to take command of the ship. Oppenheimer was the first to leap aboard, followed quickly by Akasha, Jolene, and the Lost One. Behind them, Leon, Javier, Wade, and Stephanie scrambled up the gangplank. Just as the last of them boarded, the Dutchman began to sail, the ship cutting through the mist as if it were water itself. The enemies behind them faded into the fog, powerless to follow the ship as it sailed into the Shadowlands, disappearing into the gloom of the realm of the dead. Once aboard, silence fell over the group, the only sound the creaking of the ship. Leon and his companions exchanged wary glances. They had escaped, but the tension between them and Oppenheimer was palpable. They had been left behind before, and the bitterness of that betrayal still lingered.
You used us. You left us to get captured to find the prison.
Yeah, you kept us in the dark about everything. About Don Vittorio, about the whole plan.
What was all this really about?
We were just your pawns in all this.
Oppenheimer's eyes narrowed, the glowing intensity of his gaze returning. He took a threatening step forward, his presence dominating the deck of the ship.
Get something through your skulls. I made you a promise that we'd bring down Don Vittorio, and we did. Don Vittorio is gone, destroyed. You have what you wanted.
Leon clenched his fists, not backing down.
You didn't tell us about the Midnight Fiends, about the real danger. We could have prepared better.
You lost to them because you weren't prepared? Not my problem. One of them, a rat-eating detective, doesn't even drink the blood of humans. The other, a polite, gentle Orlok, and you still lost.
The words cut deep, and they fell silent, their expressions dark. Oppenheimer's voice lowered even further, dripping with disdain.
You truly are a bunch of Carrion Eaters, feeding off the scraps of others, living in the shadows of stronger vampires.
Leon gritted his teeth, but then a smirk crept onto his face.
You know, that's the name we choose for the crew.
He looked over at the others, Wade, Stephanie, and Javier, who all nodded in agreement.
Yeah, the Carrion Eaters. That's who we are now.
Oppenheimer paused for a moment, his gaze sweeping over the group. Then a slow, sardonic smile crept across his face. He let out a low, almost cruel chuckle. He turned his back to them, his focus returning to the horizon as the Dutchman sailed deeper into the misty expanse of the Shadowlands. The Flying Dutchman drifted silently to a stop at the edge of the Crimson Garden. The air here was thick with the scent of iron, the sky above a dusky red. Every flower, every tree, every vine and blade of grass was colored in deep, rich shades of scarlet, as if the entire garden were nourished by blood. Roses with petals like dark rubies bloomed in every direction, their thorns gleaming under the faint, eerie light. The bark of the trees was slick with a wet sheen that mirrored the crimson hues around them. Droplets of blood hung from the tips of their leaves like morning dew. The garden was alive, pulsating with a dark energy. Oppenheimer, Akasha, and Jolene walked together, their eyes absorbing the sinister beauty of the place. Behind them, the Carrion Eaters remained silent, their earlier quarrels forgotten in the face of this otherworldly scene. The Lost One followed also in silence. Finally, they stopped, where a massive blood-red tree stood. The tower of a castle loomed beyond, casting long shadows over the garden. Akasha gave a silent look to her brother, and he nodded. She proceeded to guide the Carrion Eaters to the exit. When they were alone, Oppenheimer turned to the Lost One, his brow furrowed, frustration evident in his posture.
You've been quiet since we left the prison. It's time to talk. We brought you back. We risked a lot to get you out of there. Now that we freed you from the King's Court and their tortures, we want your help to destroy them.
You speak of the tower, but I am unwilling to join.
The Lost One said softly, his voice still dry from his long imprisonment. Oppenheimer's jaw clenched, his frustration flaring. He stepped closer to the Lost One, his fists tightening, but Jolene's reaction was immediate. She stared at him in disbelief, her voice rising.
After everything we went through to rescue you? After the King's Court destroyed our house? Why would you refuse to join us in the tower?
Before she could say more, the Lost One raised his hand, interrupting her. His voice was quiet but firm.
Your kindness has not gone unnoticed. I will not join the tower, but I can repay you with the information that can and will destroy the court as it is today.
What? Some kind of weapon?
Even better, a secret buried by one of the ancient evils of our city inside a sarcophagus.